A distress signal in the void. The vast emptiness of space stretched endlessly, the stars glimmering like silent watchers in the dark. On board the Earth ship Explorer, Captain Layla West leaned forward in her command chair, staring at the holographic screen in front of her. The silence on the bridge was tense as the crew monitored the strange signal they had intercepted. "It's definitely human," said Lieutenant Bryce Carter, the ship's communication officer. His fingers danced over the console. "But the origin, it doesn't make sense. This station hasn't been active for decades. Human or not, it's a distress signal," Layla replied firmly. Her sharp eyes scanned the data feed. "We can't just ignore it." The signal was coming from a derelict space station orbiting a dying star. The station, known as Erebus 9, was abandoned after a catastrophic failure over 20 years ago. Rumors whispered that the station's crew had vanished without a trace, but the official reports said nothing about it. Lila didn't like the mystery, but she couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, needed their help. "Captain," said Dr. Emil Navarro, the ship's science officer, adjusting his glasses nervously. "That station's orbit is unstable. The star's gravity is pulling it closer. If we dock, we'll have limited time to get out before it's torn apart." "How much time?" Leela asked, her tone calm but commanding. 6 hours, maybe less," Navarro replied, glancing at his calculations. "Plenty of time," Leela said. She stood up, her presence instantly commanding attention. "Prepare to dock. Bryce, keep trying to reach whoever sent that signal. Let them know we're coming." "Yes, ma'am," Bryce said, though his tone betrayed his unease. The Explorer approached the station carefully. On the main screen, Erebus 9 loomed like a ghostly relic of the past. Its metal hull was scarred and rusted, and its lights flickered faintly, as though the station itself were on life support. The crew worked in silence, each member focused on their tasks. "Docking complete," said Engineer Tessa Holt, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. "We're locked in. Air pressure is stable, but I'd recommend keeping suits on until we know more." Leela nodded and motioned to her team. "Tessa, Bryce, Navarro, you're with me. Everyone else, stay on the ship and monitor from here. If anything goes wrong, you get this ship out of here." "That's an order." With their helmets secured and weapons ready, the small team stepped into the airlock. The doors hissed open, revealing the station's interior. The corridors were dark, illuminated only by the faint glow of emergency lights. Dust floated in the air like tiny ghosts, disturbed by their movements. "This place gives me the creeps," Bryce muttered, his voice echoing through their comms. "Focus," Leela said sharply. She held her scanner up, watching as it tried to pinpoint the signal source. "Navarro, where's it coming from?" "The Central Command Hub," Navarro replied, tapping his wrist device. 3 levels up." The team moved cautiously through the station, their footsteps muffled by the thick layer of dust. Strange sounds echoed in the distance. Metal creaking, the faint hum of failing systems. Every now and then, they passed remnants of the station's former life. An overturned chair, a shattered datapad, a handprint smeared on a glass panel. "What happened here?" Tessa whispered, her voice barely audible. No one answered. As they reached the Central Command Hub, Leela stopped. The door was partially open, and a faint light flickered inside. She gestured for the team to stay back and carefully stepped forward. Peering into the room, she saw an old console blinking weakly, its screen displaying garbled text. The source of the distress signal. "Navarro, see if you can stabilize the console," Leela ordered, stepping aside to let him through. Navarro approached cautiously, his hand steady as he worked on the console. After a few moments, the screen cleared, revealing a single message. "Hail PUS. TAYR. Still here." "What does that mean?" Bryce asked, his voice rising slightly. Before anyone could answer, the lights in the room flickered violently, and the sound of static filled their comms. A cold gust of air swept through the station, sending shivers down their spines. Lila turned sharply, her hand on her weapon. "Everyone, stay alert," she said, her voice firm. "We're not alone." Suddenly, a faint whisper echoed through the room, barely audible but unmistakable. "You shouldn't have come here." The team froze, their eyes darting around the room. The whisper had no clear source. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Tessa gripped her tool tightly, her knuckles turning white. "Captain, we need to leave," Bryce said, panic creeping into his voice. "Not yet," Lila replied. She wasn't about to abandon whoever, or whatever, had sent that signal. "We came here to help, and we're not leaving until we figure out what's going on." As the team regrouped, the station shuddered, and a low, ominous hum filled the air. Lila's instincts screamed that they were in danger, but she also knew one thing for sure. The answers they sought lay deeper within Erebus 9, and they wouldn't leave until they found them. The women of the station. The dim corridors of Erebus 9 stretched on like a maze of forgotten memories. Captain Lila West and her team pressed forward, their footsteps echoing in the eerie silence. The message on the console, HELPUS, FAAYRD still HERE, lingered in their minds, unanswered and haunting. Who were they? And why had the crew of Erebus 9 sent such a desperate call for help? "Captain, I'm picking up something," Bryce said, his voice tight. He tapped his handheld scanner, which beeped softly. "There's a data stream coming from Sector C. It looks like holographic logs." "Holograms?" Lila asked, her brow furrowed. Bryce nodded. "Logs recorded by the station's crew. Maybe they can tell us what happened here." "Then that's where we're going," Lila decided. "Stay close, and keep your weapons ready. I don't want any surprises." The team moved deeper into the station, their flashlights casting long shadows on the walls. The air felt heavy, as if the station itself was holding its breath. As they entered Sector C, the oppressive silence was broken by a soft hum. A cluster of holographic projectors flickered weakly, their glow barely illuminating the room. "This is it," Bryce said, crouching by one of the projectors. He adjusted the controls, and a hazy figure materialized in the center of the room. The image was grainy and unstable, but it was unmistakably human. A woman in a lab coat with sharp features and tired eyes. "Dr. Elena Cade," the hologram said, her voice steady but strained. "Chief Scientist of Erebus 9. If you're hearing this, it means the station's fail-safe protocols have been breached. I don't know how much time we have, so listen carefully." The hologram's voice faltered for a moment, and then she continued. "We were studying something extraordinary, life forms we called phase shifters. They exist between dimensions, capable of bending reality itself. At first, we thought we could communicate with them, learn from them, but we were wrong." Lila's stomach tightened. "What did you do, Dr. Cade?" she whispered under her breath. "They're not just intelligent," the hologram said, as if responding to her question. "They're predators. They use our fears against us, feeding on our minds. We tried to contain them, but one of our own betrayed us. Nera Alex, my second in command. She sabotaged the containment fields during a critical experiment." Bryce swore under his breath. "A traitor. That explains the mess." The hologram flickered again, and Cade's expression grew more desperate. Nera thought she could control them, but she only made things worse. The phase shifters escaped, and now they're everywhere. If you're still on this station, leave. Leave before they find you." The hologram dissolved into static, leaving the team in stunned silence. Tessa was the first to speak. "Predators, feeding on our minds. Captain, this is way above our pay grade." "Maybe," Lila said, her voice firm, "but we're here now. And if there's even a chance that someone's alive on this station, we're not abandoning them." Navarro, who had been studying the projectors, looked up. "There's more," he said. "I found additional logs. They're fragmented, but we might be able to piece them together." "Do it," Leela said. And fast. As Navarro worked, the room grew colder. The faint hum of the projectors seemed to warp into whispers, just on the edge of hearing. Tessa glanced around nervously. "Does anyone else feel like we're being watched?" "You're not imagining it," Leela said, gripping her weapon tightly. "Eyes open, everyone." Navarro finally managed to access another log. This one showed multiple women in lab coats gathered around a containment field. Inside the field was a dark, shifting mass that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. The women's expressions ranged from awe to fear. "This is the source of everything," one of them said. "If we can stabilize its energy, we could rewrite the laws of physics. Or destroy ourselves," another muttered. "Enough," said Dr. Cade, stepping into the frame. "We've come too far to turn back now. Begin the phase alignment." The log cut off abruptly, and the room fell silent once more. Lila's team exchanged uneasy glances. Whatever the researchers had done, it had clearly gone horribly wrong. "We need to find out more about this fail-safe Dr. Cade mentioned," Leela said. "If there's a way to stop these phase shifters, we need to know." As they prepared to leave the room, a soft, melodic voice echoed through the corridor. "Help me, please." The team froze. The voice was faint but unmistakably human. It sounded like a young woman, her tone filled with pain and desperation. "Captain," Bryce asked, his voice shaky. "What do we do?" Leela didn't hesitate. "We follow the voice. But stay sharp. This could be a trap." The voice led them deeper into the station, its tone growing more pleading with each step. The corridors became darker, the air colder. Finally, they'd reached a sealed door marked crew quarters. The voice was coming from the other side. Leela signaled for her team to take positions. "Navarro, open it." Navarro hesitated but obeyed, overriding the door's controls. The door hissed open, revealing a room bathed in dim, flickering light. At its center was a young woman, sitting on the floor with her back to them. Her hair was disheveled, her clothes torn. She turned slowly to face them, her eyes wide with fear. "Thank you," she whispered. "I thought no one would come." But as Leela stepped closer, the woman's face began to change, twisting into something inhuman. Her eyes turned black, her mouth stretching into a grotesque smile. And then she vanished. The room plunged into darkness, and the whispers returned, louder than before. "They're here," Leela said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Everyone, get ready. This is just the beginning." The betrayer's mark. The air on Erebus 9 grew heavier with every step the team took. The strange, shifting energy on the station seemed to press against them, as if the walls themselves were alive and watching. Captain Layla West led the way, her weapon held tightly in her hands. The encounter with the shape-shifting woman had shaken them all, but there was no time to dwell on it. The clues they had uncovered so far, Dr. Cade's logs, the mention of phase shifters, and the betrayal by Nera Alex, only raised more questions. "We need answers," Layla said, her voice firm. "And they're not going to find themselves." Navarro consulted his scanner, his expression tense. "There's a restricted lab just ahead. If Nera sabotaged the experiments, her trail might lead there." The team pressed on, their flashlights slicing through the darkness. The lab doors were sealed tight, but the access panel was charred and sparking, as if someone had deliberately damaged it. Tessa knelt down and examined the panel. "This wasn't an accident," she said. "Someone didn't want anyone getting in or out." "Can you override it?" Leela asked. Tessa nodded, pulling out her toolkit. "Give me a minute." As Tessa worked, the team spread out, their nerves on edge. The oppressive silence of the station was broken only by the faint hum of failing systems and the occasional creak of metal. Bryce, standing guard near a window, peered out into the void of space. The dying star cast an eerie red glow over the station, its light flickering like a heartbeat. "This place feels wrong," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Like it's alive. You're not wrong, Navarro said, glancing up from his scanner. The energy signatures on this station are strange. They're not just mechanical or biological. They're something else entirely. Like the phase shifters, Bryce asked, his grip tightening on his weapon. Navarro hesitated. Maybe. Or maybe it's the station itself, warped by whatever experiments they were doing here. Before Bryce could reply, Tessa let out a triumphant noise. Got it. The doors open. The heavy doors slid apart with a groan, revealing the restricted lab. The room was in chaos. Equipment overturned, datapads scattered across the floor, and strange symbols scrawled on the walls in what looked like dark, dried blood. At the center of the room was a shattered containment field, its glass shards glittering ominously in the dim light. Looks like we found ground zero, Bryce said, his voice low. Navarro approached the containment field, scanning the area. This must be where they kept the phase shifters, he said. And this, he gestured to the symbols on the walls. This wasn't just sabotage. This was ritualistic. Ritualistic, Leela repeated, her tone skeptical. Navarro nodded. Look at the patterns. These aren't random. They're deliberate. Nera didn't just sabotage the containment field. She performed some kind of ritual. Why would she do that? Tessa asked, her voice tinged with fear. Power, Navarro said simply. She thought she could control the phase shifters, bend them to her will. As the team examined the lab, Leela noticed a datapad half buried under a pile of debris. She picked it up, brushing off the dust, and activated the screen. The datapad flickered to life, displaying Nera Alex's personal logs. Log entry 47. They don't understand. Kate and the others are fools, clinging to their outdated morals. The phase shifters are the key to unlocking our full potential. I've seen what they can do, how they can reshape reality itself. But they need a guide, a master. And that's going to be me. Log entry 48. The ritual is almost complete. The containment field will fall, and they will be free. They've shown me what I need to do. I will become one with them, and together, we'll transcend this mortal shell. Leela's jaw tightened as she read the logs. She wasn't just a saboteur. She was delusional. She thought she could bond with these creatures. She succeeded, Navarro said grimly, pointing to a series of readings on his scanner. The energy signatures in this room. They match hers, or at least what's left of her. Nera didn't just release the phase shifters. She became part of them. A sudden crash interrupted their thoughts. The team spun around, weapons raised. One of the overturned pieces of equipment had shifted, as if something, or someone, had moved it. Captain, Tessa whispered, her voice shaking. We're not alone. The shadows in the room began to writhe, taking on strange, shifting forms. Eyes glinted in the darkness, and a low guttural growl filled the air. Fall back, Leela ordered. Get to the corridor. Now. The team moved quickly, backing toward the door as the shadows advanced. Just as they reached the corridor, one of the forms lunged. Leela fired her weapon, the shot illuminating the creature for a split second. Its form was grotesque. Half-human, half-shifter, with glowing eyes and tendrils of dark energy twisting around its body. It's her, Navarro said, his voice filled with dread. It's Nera. The creature let out a bone-chilling scream, and the station seemed to tremble in response. Leela fired again, but the shots only seemed to slow it down. Keep moving, she shouted. We can't fight this thing head-on. The team sprinted down the corridor, the sound of Nera's screams echoing behind them. As they ran, Leela's mind raced. Nera Alex had become something far more dangerous than they had imagined. And if she had truly bonded with the phase shifters, the entire station, and possibly their lives, was in even greater danger than they'd feared. We need a plan, Leela said, her voice resolute. And fast. This isn't just a rescue mission anymore. It's a fight for survival. The phase shifters strike. The Erebus 9 station seemed to shift around them, the once familiar corridors now feeling like a labyrinth of shadows and flickering lights. Captain Layla West and her team had narrowly escaped the creature that had once been Nera Alex, but the reprieve felt fragile. The station hummed with an unsettling energy, and every corner seemed alive with the whispers of unseen things. "Status check," Leela ordered, her voice sharp but steady. She didn't let the fear creeping into her chest show. Barely holding it together, Bryce muttered, his face pale under his helmet. "Whatever that thing was, it's still out there." "Navarro." Leela pressed. The science officer was scanning the walls, his device beeping erratically. "The station's energy levels are spiking. It's like the phase shifters are feeding off something. Maybe the station itself, or us." "Perfect," Tessa said, her sarcasm failing to mask the tremor in her voice. Trapped on a station with reality-bending monsters, just a normal Tuesday. Leela ignored the tension in the group and focused on the map on her wrist display. "There's a systems hub 2 decks down. If we can access it, we might be able to regain control of the station, or at least figure out what's keeping the phase shifters here." Bryce shook his head. "What if we can't? What if the whole station's just theirs now?" Leela met his gaze, her eyes unwavering. "Then we blow it to hell." The team moved cautiously, their flashlights casting jittery beams of light through the dark corridors. The whispers that had plagued them earlier grew louder, more insistent. They weren't words, exactly, more like fragments of emotion. Fear, anger, despair. Leila felt a cold sweat break out on the back of her neck. Whatever the phase shifters were, they were close. Watching. Waiting. As they reached the systems hub, a sudden vibration ran through the station, causing the walls to groan and the lights to flicker. Bryce stumbled, catching himself against the wall. What the hell was that? "Energy surge," Navarro said, staring at his scanner. "Massive. It's like the whole station just shifted." "Shifted how?" Leela demanded. Navarro hesitated. "It's hard to explain. The station isn't just a physical space anymore. It's overlapping with something else. Another dimension, maybe. The phase shifters dimension." Before anyone could respond, the corridor ahead of them warped. The walls seemed to melt and stretch, forming a tunnel of twisting shadows. From within, figures began to emerge. Tall, humanoid shapes with bodies that flickered like static, their movements jerky and unnatural. "Open fire," Leela commanded. The team unleashed a barrage of plasma bolts, the bright flashes illuminating the creatures for brief moments. Their forms were horrifying, impossible angles, limbs that seemed to bend and twist in ways that defied logic. The plasma bolts struck them, but the creatures barely reacted, their bodies absorbing the energy like water soaking into sand. "Fall back," Leela shouted, firing as she moved. "We can't stop them here." The team retreated, the creatures pursuing them relentlessly. The air grew colder, and the whispers turned into a deafening roar inside their helmets. Leela gritted her teeth, forcing herself to focus. They needed a plan, and fast. "Tessa, can you rig a barrier?" Leela asked, glancing over her shoulder as they ran. Tessa nodded, pulling a small device from her belt. "I can set up an energy field, but it won't hold for long." "Do it," Leela said. "Give us some breathing room." Tessa dropped to one knee, her hands moving quickly as she assembled the barrier. The creatures were closing in, their distorted forms flickering in and out of existence. Just as one of them lunged, Tessa activated the device. A glowing wall of energy sprang up, forcing the creatures to halt. "That'll slow them down," Tessa said, panting. "But it won't last." "Good enough," Leela said. "We need to regroup and figure out how to fight these things." The team retreated to a maintenance room, barricading the door behind them. The glow from the barrier outside flickered ominously, a reminder of how little time they had. Lila turned to Navarro, who was already analyzing his scanner. "They're not invincible," Navarro said, his voice urgent. "They're tied to the station somehow. If we can destabilize their anchor, whatever's connecting them to this dimension, we might be able to destroy them." "And how do we find that anchor?" Bryce asked, his tone laced with frustration. "It could be anywhere." Navarro hesitated, then looked at Layla. "The artifact. The one we saw in the logs. It's the only thing that makes sense. It was the focus of their experiments, and it's probably the key to everything." "Where is it?" Leela asked. Navarro checked his map. "Central lab. 2 decks up." Leela nodded. "Then that's where we're going." Before they could move, the whispers returned, louder and more sinister. The lights in the room flickered, and the temperature dropped even further. One of the shadows in the corner began to shift, taking on a humanoid form. "They found us," Tessa whispered, her voice trembling. The creature stepped forward, its body flickering like a broken hologram. It raised a hand, and the walls around them began to twist and bend, the metal groaning under the strain. Leela fired, but the creature vanished, reappearing inches away from her. Its face, or what passed for a face, twisted into a mockery of a smile. "You cannot win," it said, its voice a chorus of overlapping tones. "This place belongs to us now." Leela didn't flinch. "Not yet. It doesn't." She grabbed a plasma grenade from her belt and activated it, tossing it directly at the creature. The explosion rocked the room, sending the team sprawling. When the smoke cleared, the creature was gone, but the whispers remained. "Let's move," Leela said, helping Tessa to her feet. "We need to reach that artifact before it's too late." As they left the room, the station seemed to shift again, the corridors stretching and warping in impossible ways. Lila's resolve hardened. Whatever the phase shifters were, they were playing with the station like a toy. And if they didn't stop them soon, the Explorer, and possibly all of humanity, would pay the price. Trust and betrayal. The corridors of Erebus 9 had become an enemy in themselves. What had once been a maze of sterile metal and cold, flickering lights now seemed to shift like an organic being, its walls bending in on them with each passing step. Captain Leela West and her team moved cautiously through the darkness, the tension among them palpable. They had seen horrors, creatures that flickered between dimensions, a station that seemed alive with malevolent energy. And now they faced a far more insidious threat, the unknown allegiance of one of their own. "How much further to the central lab?" Leela asked, her voice cutting through the thick silence. "Not far," Navarro said, his voice trained. "But we need to be careful. If Nero was right, and the phase shifters are tied to this station's energy system, we could be walking right into their trap." Leela's eyes narrowed as she scanned the twisting passage ahead. She knew Navarro was right, but there was something else eating at her, something worse than the creatures lurking in the shadows. Betrayal. Nera Alex had been a member of their crew, just as much a part of their team as any of them. Now she was something else entirely, a twisted fusion of human and phase shifter, no longer bound by human morals or loyalty. And there was another thought creeping into Lila's mind, one she had not dared voice out loud. What if Nera wasn't the only one who had betrayed them? She looked around at her team. Bryce was at the rear, his face grim, eyes constantly scanning the darkness. Tessa moved beside her, the engineer's sharp instincts always alert. Navarro walked ahead, his hands busy with the scanner, trying to get a lock on the lab's energy signature. They were all reliable, skilled in their fields, but now, with the paranoia that the phase shifters had infected their reality, Lila wasn't sure who could be trusted. "Stay sharp," she said. "We don't know who or what's watching us." The group continued to move in silence. Each step brought them closer to the central lab, where they hoped to find the artifact that could give them a fighting chance. But the closer they got, the more uneasy Leela felt. The air was growing colder, the walls pulsing with an unnatural rhythm, like the heartbeat of the station itself. The whispers, once faint, had returned with force, seeping into their minds, sowing seeds of doubt. "You okay, Captain?" Tessa asked, her voice breaking the silence. Leela glanced at her. "Fine. Just thinking." "About what?" Leela hesitated. "About Nera. About everything we've learned so far. There's a lot that doesn't add up. It doesn't make sense for her to betray us like that. Unless—" her voice trailed off, but the implication hung in the air. "Unless someone had helped her. Someone who knew the station better than the rest of them." Tessa's eyes widened as realization hit her. "You don't think one of us?" "Keep your eyes open," Leela said, cutting her off. "We'll deal with that when we have answers." They reached a junction where the hallway split. To their left was the central lab, but a faint, flickering light on the right caught Leela's attention. She motioned for the team to stop. "What is that?" Navarro asked, his scanner already tracking it. Leela led the way toward the light. As they turned the corner, they found an abandoned security room, its door half ajar. Inside, a wall of monitors displayed various areas of the station, some static-filled, others showing grainy footage of empty rooms. But one screen caught Leela's attention. Footage from earlier, when they had first entered the station. It was a recording of them, walking down the very corridor they had just traversed. "Someone's been watching us," Bryce muttered, his hand going to his sidearm. "This was supposed to be a rescue mission," Leela said. "Whoever's been watching us. They knew we were coming. I didn't think about it before, but—" Navarro's voice faltered. "The logs we found earlier. Nera's logs. They were too detailed. She knew things that we hadn't told anyone." Leela's heart skipped a beat. The suspicion she had buried deep inside her was rising to the surface. "You think she wasn't the only one who knew what we were doing?" "I think someone on this ship may have been feeding information to her," Navarro said. The room fell into a tense silence. The idea was too dangerous, too catastrophic to ignore. If someone on their own crew had turned, it would mean they were fighting a battle on two fronts, one against the phase shifters and one against their own team. Who else would have had access to this? Tessa asked, her eyes darting across the monitors. Someone with control of the station's systems. Leela looked at Bryce, then Navarro, then back at Tessa. They had all been loyal to each other, but loyalty meant nothing if it was misplaced. "Think about it," Leela said, her voice low. "It would have to be someone with knowledge of the station's layout, someone who could manipulate the data without drawing attention." She paused. The only person who had that kind of access, the only one who could have possibly betrayed them, was someone they had all trusted implicitly. Lieutenant Bryce Carter. "What if it's you, Bryce?" Leela asked, her voice steady, though her heart raced in her chest. Bryce's face froze, his hand hovering over his weapon. His eyes widened in shock, but there was something else there too. Guilt? Fear? "Captain, what the hell are you saying?" Bryce's voice was strained, a touch of panic creeping in. "I'm not accusing you," Leela said, her gaze never leaving his. "I'm just trying to make sense of all of this. It doesn't add up. The logs, the knowledge. Someone's been watching us. Someone's been manipulating us." Bryce's mouth opened, but no words came out. For a long moment, the tension between them thickened, suffocating the room. Lila's hand tightened on her weapon as the air seemed to crackle with the weight of unspoken words. And then, without warning, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. The walls seemed to close in, the shadows around them twisting and contorting into shapes that shouldn't have been possible. "You need to trust me, Lila," Bryce said, his voice breaking the silence. "I don't know what's happening to this station, but I swear to you, I didn't betray you." Leela studied his face, searching for any sign of deceit, but what she found was only fear. Fear not just for himself, but for all of them. And in that moment, a decision had to be made. They had no time for suspicion and doubt. The phase shifters were closing in, and they needed every ally they could find. "Fine," Leela said, lowering her weapon. But we're all in this together now. No more secrets. No more games. With the unspoken understanding that trust had been shattered, but still holding on to it in a fragile thread, the team continued down the corridor toward the central lab. The artifact. Their only hope was within reach, but so was the reality that their greatest danger might not be the phase shifters. It might be each other. A desperate gamble. The heart of Erebus 9 was a maze of strange, shifting hallways and rooms that seemed to bend space itself. Every step Leela took was filled with uncertainty, the overwhelming presence of the phase shifters growing stronger with each passing moment. The walls seemed to breathe, the air pulsing with a strange energy. The station's heartbeat had turned into a deafening roar in their ears, a constant reminder of the power that lurked just beyond their perception. Captain Leela West, her nerves razor-sharp, led her team through the labyrinth. Their goal was simple: reach the central lab where the artifact that could potentially end the nightmare was locked away. But with every turn, the station seemed to shift in ways that defied the laws of physics. One moment, a door would be in front of them. The next, it would disappear, leaving only a wall of rusted metal. Time seemed fluid here, stretching and warping with every step they took. "This place is losing all sense of structure," Navarro muttered, his voice low but urgent as he scanned his wrist console. "The fabric of the station is literally unraveling. If we don't get to that artifact soon, we might not be able to leave. Ever." "Then let's move faster," Leela ordered, her eyes narrowing. The calm confidence that had kept her steady throughout this nightmare was beginning to crack under the weight of their situation. The phase shifters were close, and they needed the artifact if they were to have any chance of surviving the horrors they were about to face. Tessa, moving at Lila's side, glanced nervously over her shoulder. If Nera's right about the artifact, it might be the key to controlling the phase shifters, but we don't even know if it's stable anymore. It could be a weapon or a curse. "There's no choice," Leela said. "We have to try. We've already lost too many people to turn back now." As they approached the lab, the air became colder, the very atmosphere thick with a sense of dread. A distant hum echoed through the hallways, vibrating the floor beneath their feet. The closer they got to the lab, the more intense the energy field around them became, an invisible pressure that pushed against them, making it harder to breathe. The lab doors loomed ahead, ancient and scared by time, their edges glowing with a faint blue light. The station's systems had clearly been malfunctioning for years, but there was something about the lab, something almost alive. "Here we are," Navarro said, glancing back at Leela. His eyes were wide with unease. "Once we enter, we'll be in the heart of the storm. The phase shifters have been drawn to this place. If we open those doors, they'll know we're here." Tessa placed a hand on her weapon, her jaw set. "We're ready." Leela nodded and moved to the door control. With a steady hand, she keyed in the override, the system groaning as it unlocked with a series of metallic clicks. As the door swung open, a cold gust of air rushed out, followed by an overwhelming presence of something ancient and unknowable. Inside, the central lab was a mess of abandoned equipment, shattered containment units, and dimly flickering lights. At the center of the room stood a pedestal, bathed in an eerie blue glow. On it rested the artifact, the very key to their survival. It was a smooth, crystalline object, pulsating with strange energy, almost as if it were alive. Leila stepped into the room, her eyes scanning every corner, every flicker of shadow. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. She could feel the phase shifters in the room, hidden in the corners of her vision, shifting in and out of existence. They were here, watching, waiting. "This is it," Navarro said, his voice tense. "If we can use the artifact to break the connection between the phase shifters and this station, we might be able to stop them. But there's no way of knowing if it will work. It's a gamble. A gamble we have to take," Leela said. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her. If they didn't succeed, the station, and everyone on it, would be lost forever. Tessa, get to the console and try to power up the artifact." As Tessa moved to the console, Leela turned to face the room. The shadows seemed to stretch, as though the darkness itself was alive. She could hear the faint whispers again, words that made no sense but were filled with malice. The phase shifters were close. Too close. Suddenly, a sharp, screeching noise cut through the room, and the walls seemed to ripple like water. A shape appeared in the corner of the lab, a tall, slender figure, its eyes glowing like hot coals. Then another figure emerged, followed by more, until the entire room seemed filled with them. The phase shifters had come. "Activate it, Tessa," Leela yelled. Tessa slammed her hands onto the console, her fingers flying over the keys. Sparks shot from the console as the energy began to hum louder, the artifact on the pedestal glowing brighter. The phase shifters hissed and twisted in the air, their forms flickering in and out of focus. "We need more power," Navarro shouted, his voice strained. "It's not enough." Leela's heart pounded in her chest as the air around them began to warp. She could feel the energy pulling at her, the pressure building. She knew what she had to do. "We don't have time," she said, stepping toward the pedestal. The phase shifters were closing in, their forms distorting and shifting with terrifying speed. "I'll activate the artifact. It's our only shot." "Leela, no," Navarro cried. "You don't know what it will do. It could destroy everything." But it was too late. Lila's hand closed around the smooth, pulsating artifact, and in that instant, the world exploded into light. The lab around them seemed to vanish, the walls collapsing as reality itself began to warp. The phase shifters howled, their voices blending into one, an overwhelming cacophony of sound. The energy from the artifact surged through Lila's body, searing her skin as it burned with unearthly power. Her vision blurred, her mind spinning as she was pulled into a different dimension, one where nothing made sense, where the laws of physics no longer applied. The artifact was opening a gateway. The phase shifter's dimension was spilling into this one. But Leela was fighting back, her will focusing on the artifact, trying to bend it to her command. And then a voice, deep, ancient, and powerful, echoed in her mind. "You cannot control what you have unleashed, human." The voice was everywhere, inside her, outside her. It was as if the very fabric of the universe itself had spoken. Lila's hands trembled, her grip slipping on the artifact. But she held on. She had to. The fate of the station, and everyone on it, depended on it. With every ounce of strength she had left, she focused on the one thing she knew for sure. She had to close the gate. She had to sever the connection between the phase shifters and the station. And then, with a final, desperate surge of energy, she did. The light exploded outward, blinding and deafening. The phase shifters screamed, their forms unraveling as the fabric of the station's reality shattered. And then, silence. Leela collapsed to the ground, her vision fading as the weight of the artifact's power left her exhausted. She could hear the sounds of her team calling out to her, but her mind was drifting. The battle was over, for now. But at what cost? A new frontier. Layla West awoke in the cold silence of space. The overwhelming force of the artifact's power had thrown her body into a state of unconsciousness, and now, as she blinked her eyes open, she was met with nothing but a strange calmness. The chaos of the previous moments, the destruction of the phase shifters, the energy surge, and the collapse of the station's fabric seemed like a dream, a twisted hallucination brought on by the artifact's overwhelming power. But when Leela tried to move, she found herself lying on cold, metal floors, surrounded by the broken remains of Erebus 9. Her head spun with dizziness, and a dull ache throbbed in her skull. Yet beneath the physical pain, there was something else, a strange, almost oppressive sense of awareness. She wasn't alone. She could feel the presence of the phase shifters, no longer distorted and monstrous, but closer to her than ever before. Pushing herself up, Leela stumbled to her feet. The remains of the station around her were eerily silent, the lights dim and flickering like the last breath of a dying world. The artifact was still in her hand, but it had changed. What had once been a smooth crystalline object had now become a swirling, pulsing mass of energy, shifting in and out of visible form. It hummed with power, and Leela could feel the connection to it more deeply than ever. Her skin tingled with the knowledge that the artifact had bonded with her in some way, had become a part of her essence. And yet it wasn't the artifact that made her feel this way. It was them. The phase shifters. They were no longer the twisted, hostile creatures she had fought so hard to escape. Now, as she stood in the wreckage of Erebus 9, she realized the truth. They were not invaders. They were victims, caught between dimensions, existing as fragments of something larger, something far older than the human understanding of space and time. "Captain," came a voice from behind her. Leela turned quickly, her hand instinctively going to her sidearm. But it wasn't a phase shifter. It was Tessa, looking disheveled but alive, her eyes wide with fear. She stepped into the dim light of the ruined lab, scanning the area around her warily. "Are you all right?" Tessa asked, her voice cautious. She looked at Leela, then at the artifact in her hand. You did it. You stopped them." Leela nodded slowly, her mind still reeling from the events. "It's not over yet," she said quietly. "We've only just begun to understand what we've unleashed." "What do you mean?" Tessa asked, confusion etching her face. "The phase shifters, they're gone, right? We saw them vanish when the artifact activated." "They vanished, yes," Leela said, her voice low. "But they didn't just disappear. I felt it. Felt them. They're still here, in a way. They've become part of this place. Part of me." Tessa frowned. "What are you saying?" Leela hesitated before answering, her thoughts finally coalescing into something she could articulate. The artifact didn't just close the gateway. It opened a new one. A new frontier. The phase shifters. They didn't leave. They've merged with this station, with the space between dimensions. They are now connected to this world in a way that we can't even begin to comprehend. Tessa's eyes widened as she began to understand. "You mean they're not just trapped here anymore? They're free?" "Not exactly," Layla replied. "They're no longer bound by the same rules as before, but they're also not fully free. The station was their anchor, their prison, and now they exist outside of space and time, in the void between worlds. And I'm the bridge." Leela felt the hum of the artifact again, its energy thrumming against her chest. It wasn't just power, it was a presence. She could feel the phase shifters, not as hostile creatures, but as entities of a different kind, intelligent, ancient, and searching for a way to coexist. "What do we do now?" Tessa asked quietly, her voice full of uncertainty. "We need to make contact," Leela said, her tone resolute. "The phase shifters aren't our enemies. They never were. They were just misunderstood. They were trying to survive, trying to find a place in this world. We have to communicate with them, understand them, and show them that humanity is willing to coexist." Tessa looked skeptical, but nodded. "If that's true, then why haven't they tried to kill us already?" "Because they're not monsters," Leela said, the weight of her words settling over her. "They've been misunderstood by those who came before us, those who sought to control them, enslave them. Nera, she was the same. She thought she could control them. But now we have the chance to do what she couldn't. We have the chance to learn." Tessa seemed to consider this, the gears turning in her mind. But what if they can't be reasoned with? What if they're just using us to escape, to take over? "We won't know unless we try," Leela said firmly. "I've seen what they can do, and I've felt their desperation. They don't want to destroy humanity. They just want to exist, and we have to help them do that." As Leela spoke, the station around them seemed to shudder. The walls flickered, warping and shifting, but it wasn't like before. It wasn't hostile. It was as though the station itself was coming to life, responding to her words, to her presence. The phase shifters were listening. In that moment, Leela realized that she wasn't just a captain anymore. She wasn't just a human fighting for survival. She was something else, something between worlds, between dimensions. She was the bridge between humanity and the unknown. "What happens now?" Tessa asked, her voice small but filled with awe. Leela took a deep breath, her eyes focused on the artifact in her hand. "Now we make history. We reach out to the phase shifters. We show them that humanity is capable of understanding, of empathy. And maybe, just maybe, we'll find a way to coexist, a way to move beyond the fear and the misunderstanding." The whispers in the air grew louder, but this time, they weren't threatening. They were curious, eager to know what would come next. The gateway between the worlds was open, and Leela knew that this was just the beginning. A new frontier had been unlocked, and it was one where humanity could either rise to greatness or fall to destruction. But Leela was determined. She would not let the darkness consume them. She would find a way to unite the two worlds. She would build the bridge between them. And for the first time in a long while, Leela West felt hope.